Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. One of the things that I've been doing with my photography as of late is shooting with a wide angle focal length, the equivalent of about 24 millimeters. And I typically favor like a 35 millimeter, that's my sweet spot, or maybe 50. So 24 is a bit more of a challenge. One, because it includes more in the frame, hence the wide angle. And one of the challenges there is that because it includes so much in the frame, there's a greater risk, a greater potential for distraction. Stuff, especially at the edges of the frame, suddenly things that, would not be a big deal with a shorter or narrower focal length suddenly become a really big issue because there's just so many distractions. There could be this thing that I wasn't paying attention to at the edge of the frame that completely ruins the shot. So that's one of the things that I have to be very vigilant about whenever I'm shooting with the wide angle. But one of the other things I realize is that if I'm shooting a 24 millimeter focal length and I'm shooting my subject at the same distance that I would shoot with a 35 or a 50, I'm usually too far. And that to have images that have any sort of impact, sometimes I need to be a lot closer, sometimes uncomfortably close. I've been noticing that over the last couple of days because, especially photographing people, even though I've been doing this for a very long time, shooting as close as I know I need to was something I was having a lot of difficulty with because I really had to get uncomfortably close to people in order to pull off the shots. And sometimes I can't get past my own anxiety and fear. So one of the things I wanted to focus on was just look at a couple of examples of photographers who are using what looks to be wide angle focal lengths, but they're shooting really incredibly close, and how differently these images look as compared to a lot of other stuff that's out there, especially in our group, because you'll find when you take a look at a lot of the images, I think most people tend to shoot between a distance of about 5 to 10 feet. That's probably the sweet spot for a lot of photography, regardless of what focal length you're using. But let's look at some photographers that are really moving nice and tight. All right, here is this image by Johnny Shakedown. He made this with a Canon 5D Mark II, 24 millimeter focal length, and shot at 1/640th of a second at f6.3 at 24 millimeters. And this is the kind of shot that I'm talking about you're on the street and you get close. I mean, literally, in order to get this guy to dominate as much of the frame as he does here, Johnny here would need to be within arm's reach of the guy in order to make that shot happen. There's something about working wide and working close that adds this dynamic to a shot that is something that you just can't replicate with any other focal length. Even if you're shooting with a telephoto lens and you fill up the frame with this guy to the same proportions as this, it's a very different feel to it. When you're using a telephoto lens, there's this distance, there's this separation that occurs. But when you're using a wide angle and you're this close, there's an intimacy that comes out of the shot, even though the man here is not acknowledging the photographer and is probably not even aware that the photograph is being made. There's this just intimacy is really the best word that I can come up with when it comes to these shots. And these are the kind of shots that I really want to pursue, because one of the things that I want to get away from is having this sort of clinical distance that's created where people are just sort of elements in my shot. I mean, this man is an element in this photograph, no doubt, but it produces a very different feel than if the person is 5 or 7 feet away and you're photographing them within the context of the scene. And you can see by the use of the wide angle, even though Johnny here is very close to the subject, it includes a whole lot. You have the skyscraper on the left, you have the figure of the guy with the water bottle crossing the street, you have the street signals right above his left shoulder, you have the women in the lower right hand, you have the storefront and this building on the upper right hand corner. You have these elements here that help provide a sense of place. You realize you're in an urban environment somewhere. And these people here are sort of bustling around a corner, and this man is, more than likely about to cross the street. But there's a connection to all of these different elements that go beyond just their graphic nature. But you just feel like you are in the midst of that space. You just feel like you are at that street corner, waiting along with this man to cross the street. Now, one of the things about shooting this close is that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with it. Some people say that it's very confrontational, it's very aggressive, and I don't doubt that. But sometimes you just have to get close in order to pull off the shot. I interviewed a photographer, Michelle Groskopf, last week on the show, and we talked about this because she works really close and she works with flash. And if you haven't heard the interview or looked at her pictures, you should take a look at it, because you take a look at her photographs and they are remarkably different and distinctive than a lot of the other street photography that's out there. And regardless of how you feel about using flash on the street, just the fact that you're willing to take those 2 or 3 steps closer to your subjects really provides you an opportunity to make a picture that is incredibly different, that is not dependent just on your focal length or your camera or the megapixels or any of that stuff. It's just about, how much are you willing to risk to go in there and really kind of make the shot happen. I don't know if Johnny here was shooting from the hip, where he wasn't actually looking through the viewfinder. This camera is at about test level, so the likelihood that he may have been shooting from the hip is likely, and that's one of the ways that you can do it. I still like looking through the viewfinder or looking at the LCD of the camera so I can more carefully frame the shot. But to each his own. But I think what's most important, more so than anything else, is the idea of, can I get closer? Can I get something different by just taking those few steps closer to make something really fascinating and interesting happen? Here's this image by Axel. I'm not going to even try and pronounce his last name. My apologies. No technical information here. Now, this doesn't look like it's an extremely wide-angle lens. It doesn't look like it's a 24. Maybe it's a 35 millimeter, maybe even a 50, somewhere around there. I don't see the distortion that I typically would expect to see with a 24 or 28 millimeter lens. But what really speaks to me here is just the proximity, how close Axel is to this fellow here. And there was some engagement that was happening here, because it says here in the caption that Axel was telling him about the time it took him to fly from Europe to India. And there's, you look at this shot and you feel like you are in that conversation. A big part of that is the way this fellow's hands are on either side of the frame. Not only do they sort of frame his head, but it feels like you are in his space. And I really like that about the shot. And also, the guy has great hands. I mean, his face is fantastic, but his hands are just as good. They're just as telling about who he is. And I just love that about the shot, because, again, you have a bunch of different elements in the background, some of which could have been distracting, but they're blocked by the placement of the hands within the frame. Also, the fact that Axel here is using a fairly moderate to wide aperture to keep him, the subject, relatively sharp and the rest of the background out of focus. So in this case, using the relatively moderate depth of field keeps the whole fellow sharp, his face, his shirt, his hands, and you just focus on him. But you have enough detail in the background to get that all-important sense of place. And I think that when you're engaging with someone on the street, a lot of people think about making a portrait, doing these sort of candid portraits, where either the person is completely oblivious to them or asking them to pose for you. And those images are very different. But there's sometimes like moments like this, where you are engaged with your subject, where you're talking to them, maybe after you've made their photograph. And one of the things that I'll do is, if I've made a photograph of someone and then I've approached them after I made my initial shot and I'm talking to them, I may continue making photographs because I want something genuine. I don't want something just posed in not animated. Having a moment where I'm seeing someone sort of engage with me can provide some really interesting moments that really serve a photograph really, really well. And it's surprising that once you're engaged with someone, periodically raising the camera to take their picture, it doesn't stop the flow of the engagement because it's sort of still happening. It's lovely, and I think Axel just did a great job with this shot and capturing that all important moment. Now here's a shot by Barry Lowman, shot with an Olympus EM5. Don't know the focal length here, but it was shot at ISO 200 at 1/160th of a second. Now, I may not know the focal length from the EXIF information, but it looks like it's a really wide-angle lens. If you take a look at the edges of the frame here, you can see some really distinctive distortion that's happening here. So I suspect he may have been using something even wider than a 24 millimeter. The woman's face is slightly distorted in terms of her features, but as you start moving towards the edges of the frame, you see that it's even more so. So the subject, even though in the center of the frame, actually is really well served by that, because this distortion is not so much that it would really ruin the photograph. But as a result of using that really ultra wide angle lens, he is probably less than 15 inches from this woman's face as she's moving through this scene. And it looks like these people were photographing something that was behind Barry or over his left of his shoulder. And this woman was just moving through the scene, turning the corner here, and he made the shot, and also made it with flash. And wow, I mean, this is as intimate as you can get. This woman is really, really close. I mean, you could literally put your arm over her shoulder. That's how close Barry is here. And this has a very distinctive feel. Imagine this shot made with a 50 millimeter lens, shot, let's say 5 feet. I mean, you can take a look at a lot of the images that are in our Flickr pool of people walking down the street, turning a corner, shot at about 35 to 50 millimeter, at 35 or 50 millimeter. Shot at a distance of about 5 to 7 feet. Those shots don't have this feel. Even though you're including more information in those shots, it's the whole body of the person. You're getting more context in terms of the overall scene. There's something about the feel of the shot that's very, very different. And I really like this. It's something that I'm trying to pursue in my own work, but as I said before, even after all those years of photographing, I'm still having to get past my own anxiety and fear about moving in closer. But I know that I need and want to make those kind of photographs. So every time I go out there, I'm thinking about, okay, Ibarionex, how can I push it a little further? Take those steps, get closer, make the shot. Don't just walk away and just feel like, I should have made it. You guys know. If you guys have been shooting on the street, you know what this feeling is. You know how frustrating it can be when you don't make the choice to do it. And we don't see a lot of these shots in our group, but there are a lot of photographers out there that are practicing this type of this photography in proximity with people. And it's not for everyone. I'm not saying that everyone should be shooting this way. I'm just saying that for me and probably a lot of other people listening to this, you kind of know that this is the direction that you need to play around with and see whether or not it produces the kind of images that you're hoping to get. So I hope that was helpful to you. If you want to submit images to our Flickr pool, you just need to go to Flickr and go to the Candid Frame, and I'll be more than glad to add you to our growing group of photographers. There's some great work that's happening here, and we're going to be doing some more stuff with the YouTube channel and the Flickr group in the coming months. It's a little too early to talk about it now, but I'm hoping to be able to create a greater degree of interaction with everyone. And also, if you want to keep up with the work that I've been doing, probably the best place to do that is just by following me on Instagram, and it's just Ibarionex. I'm the only one out there. Surprise, surprise. And you can add me, and you can see the work that I'm doing every day, and what's often leading me to pick the topics that I discuss on this YouTube channel. Oh, and don't let me forget, mentioning the Candid Frame, which is a podcast in which I interview photographers about their work and career. And you can find that at thecandidframe.com. Well, thanks again for joining me. And if you like what you're seeing here, please subscribe. And I will see you next time.